Okay, well, welcome to all of you who are participating in our Ride and Tie. This is information for AARC vets and scribes, and I hope that you're either watching live or maybe watching the tape later, and I hope this will be a huge, huge help for you. What we want to do tonight, just really quickly, is go through some introductions, and I'll introduce myself in a moment. The most important thing I think we can do tonight is at the bottom of your screen. If you use your cursor down there, you'll see a chat feature, and you can ask questions. And at the very end, any questions you have, we will answer. But we'll wait until the very end to answer all of those questions. But know that that's probably the most important thing we can do tonight because we want to be helpful to you. We are recording this, and it'll be up on the AARC website and social media, and then that kind of thing. And if you don't mind, if you'll go ahead and mute yourself if you're not presenting at the moment, and that'll help us with any background noise. And so again, as I mentioned, this is the third of, I guess, three. We may do some more, but the third of three webinars that the Ride and Tie Association has done with AERC to familiarize AERC with what ride managers need to do if they want to put on a Ride and Tie. Just a general for other people who want to know what is Ride and Tie, how do you go about competing. And then tonight, of course, are the vets and the scribes. And so let me introduce myself, and then I'll let our panelists introduce themselves, and then we'll jump right in. We'll do this really quickly. So I'm Courtney Kruger. I am on the Ride and Tie National Board, and I'm a strange bird in one sense because I've only been riding horses since about 2011. I got into Ride and Tie and into equestrian stuff kind of from the running side, and that happens some, but not as often. I'm only the host tonight. We have four wonderful vets with us tonight, and they're going to do most of the talking once I finally get through all our introductions. I'm also proud to introduce to you, or let you see, my wife, Lee, is sitting next to me. She often functions as a scribe, and so she is here tonight to learn. So our other panel, our four panelists are first Greg Bellers. And Greg, you want to tell us a little about yourself?
Yeah, howdy. And again, welcome to everyone. I first got involved with endurance actually when I was still in veterinary school, and they needed help with P&R teams at the kind of local ride close to where we were in Davis. So that was back in the early 70s. And then the first time I ran into this event called Ride and Tie was in where I practiced in San Jose in the mid 70s. So I've been a part of both sports for a long time. Gradually did more and more over the years. I became part of the Tevis veterinary team back in the 80s and was honored to be the head veterinarian at Tevis for a while as well. I started working with Jim Steer at the Ride and Tie Championships back in the late 90s and early aughts, and sort of gradually was doing more and more. And then when we lost Jim, the board was kind enough to have me come on as the head veterinarian. So I serve as a kind of an adjunct member to the board of directors and help in any way I can. So
thank you. You can see already we have a great panel tonight. Lonnie, tell us a little about you.
Hey, so we must be the old folks on this, and you're the whippersnappers. Like Greg, I did my first AERC ride in 1977, and one of my proudest things is my AERC number is 658. So I'm one of the still living people who has a 3-digit AERC number, and we did our first Ride and Tie in 1983. So we've been sort of going back and forth. I mean, these things are just totally compatible. Is that you use your same horse for endurance that you do for Ride and Tie. You're on the same trail, and it's whatever. Some days we do, some years we do a lot of endurance, and some years we do a Ride and Tie, depending on which horses we have. But they're both so much fun to go back and forth, and it just depends on whether you each have a horse or whether you only have one and you have to share it.
All right, thank you. And Melissa Ribley, tell us about you.
Well, it's really a pleasure to be here this evening. I just had a passion for ride and tie for many, many years, several decades now. I started out as an endurance rider, got a little bit into jogging and decided I would give ride and tie a try. And boy, I just fell in love with it right away. It's just a fun sport, a great sport with very energetic people and fun-loving people. So I've been involved in ride and tie pretty much through about every avenue you can. I've been a participant, a manager, an event manager, and also a ride and tie veterinarian. So I feel very fortunate to have seen the sport from pretty much every angle that you can, but I still continue to learn about the sport. And I encourage any veterinarian out there that has an interest in watching performance sport horses to get involved. It's a great way to see horses in action.
Super, thank you. And of course, last but absolutely not least, Nick Kohut, no stranger to the ARC, but tell us a little about you.
Well, I guess I'm from the vets. I might be the youngster of the group since I only started working first with competitive trail about 30 years ago. And very few years after that, moved into working endurance rides. Lonnie'd probably be able to better tell you what first ride and tie I started working. I've since done a ton. Ride and ties are very big here in the East. They're run not only with our endurance rides, but we run them quite often with our competitive trail. And even there with different rules and stuff, they work very well. The ride and tie groups are just a great bunch of people. A lot of fun. Now I'm not really a rider, but I was in college, a runner, marathoner, did a few ultras. So I'm familiar with that. And of course, yes, you know, as everybody knows now, I am the current president of AERC. So I'm a little grayer than the picture. So, all right, Greg, let's get started.
Thanks. All right. All right. Well, if you happen to come to the Old Dominion Ride and Tie weekend in the summer, Lonnie always puts on this wonderful clinic, and she's going to reduce it to just a little bit now. But just so you know, what is this crazy sport called ride and tie? So Lonnie, take it away.
So ride and tie is obviously it's a race with two people and one horse, and you start with one person on the ground running and one person on the horse riding. And there are some rules that Melissa will go over, but they're really, really simple. It's basically, you have to figure out how to share a horse over a course that may be 6 miles long up to 100 miles long. A lot of us have done 100 miles or 50-mile ride and ties, and they're really fun because it's in fact a lot more interesting than endurance riding, because there's so many things, so many strategies. Everybody has a different strategy. You don't necessarily have two equal runners. Usually you have a stronger runner and somebody who does a lot of the thinking. You don't have to be a marathon runner at all. In fact, it's more beneficial to be a good rider, to be somebody who can manage the horse over the endurance distance. As you can imagine, if you're a veterinarian, the thought of a marathon runner, no matter how athletic they are, being responsible for a horse out on the trail is a little scary. But so it's much more important to be a good rider and be able to manage the horse over the terrain. So the endurance ride, what we do is when we put in a ride and tie in with an endurance ride, we work with the endurance ride, so we're not adding to their workload at all. We make sure we start the race at a time when the horses come back. There will be veterinarians there already. We use whatever loop lengths the endurance ride already has. So if their first loop is 14 miles, that might be one of our loops. Or oftentimes we'll do a loop separate from the endurance riders that are going on at the same time. So what happens is at the beginning, it's on your mark, get set, go. It has a shotgun start, just like an endurance ride. One person goes off on the horse and you can do any pace you want. So ideally you're moving pretty quickly. You might be doing it a trot, canter, or gallop. But oftentimes we have new people. The horses are new to the sport. They're not totally confident being out there by themselves. So the people will run right next to each other. One will run, one will ride, and then they'll switch on and off until the horse starts figuring out what's happening and gets more comfortable with it. So typically what I would do, and this is not what everybody else does, is they start at the start. I'll be on the horse, and I usually ride, say, 6 minutes. And the 6 minutes, if it's a flat course, then you might be a mile. You might be a mile and a half. If it's a hilly course or a rocky course, you might be a third of a mile. And so I usually ride the horse for about 6 minutes. I stop, tie the horse up to a tree, and start waddling down the trail. And my runner comes running along. And the trick is they have to find the correct horse and manage to untie it and wrestle it down and manage to get on it. But so the keys for you as a veterinarian is what's happening is the horse has now just stood there for, I rode for 6 minutes, and then the horse might stand for, say, 5 minutes, stand still, not actually stand still. They're running around the tree screaming and trashing things, but that's just at the beginning. And then so the horse is actually resting for about 5 minutes. And then the runner comes up, gets on the horse. And then on my team, what we do, since I'm the weakest runner, is that she will ride till she catches me. So she might ride another 5 minutes. So the horse is now ridden in a total of 10 minutes, but then she'll hand me the horse. And we'll start all over again. As I'll climb on, she'll climb off, and I'll ride down the trail again. So the horse has this series of 10-minute rides, which might be trotting, might be cantering, and then it gets to stand for about 5 minutes or 5 to 10 minutes. So they're constantly resting all the time, which allows them to go quicker. But then they do get a lot of rest. And the other thing from the veterinarian's point of view is that when you're vetting a ride, you know that when a horse comes into a vet check, is you want them to cool down. You want them to settle so you know what's happening. If they're feeling a little crampy, if they're feeling a little dehydrated, if they're feeling a little stiff or sore, that happens. You see that once they start to cool down. That doesn't happen to the ride and tie horses because we're watching them constantly. Is every 5 minutes we're standing next to them. We're seeing how their breathing is. We're seeing how their eating is, how they're drinking. And if for a ride and tire, if something goes wrong with the horse, all your running is for nothing. So the ride and tires are very, very careful to keep their horses in one piece the best they can all the way to the end. So what happens is we alternate one person running, one person riding until you get to the end. And you can, again, it can be, the ties may be a half a mile apart, they may be a mile apart, but the horse at no time, unless you mess up, which happens fairly frequently, the horse is usually not going 2 or 3 or 4 miles at a time between rests. And then the other sport we have, which we've had for the past 10 years or so, is something called equithon. And it's a race when you have a riding section first, and then a running section. And so the riding section is usually longer, say it's 15 miles, and the run might be 5 miles, or it depends on what loops the endurance ride has available to us. And so it can be done either with one person Ironman, one person can ride the horse first and then do the run, or you can do it with 2 different people. And equithon is really super because it gets people into the sport who maybe aren't totally comfortable doing whatever section there is. So it's really easy to get runners into it and to get them hooked on it and then have them move on to do ride and tie. Courtney calls it the gateway drug, is that once they've done equithon, they think this is pretty cool. I want to go ahead and learn how to ride and make this happen. But so on an equithon, again, it's not just a wide open race. Is with an equithon, the rider will take the horse the 15 miles or so, but you don't get to start the run until the horse's pulse comes down to parameters. So the more wisely you ride the horse, the more fit your horse is, the more you take care of it, the quicker your runner can get out on the trail and disappear into the woods. So it can be, so if on an equithon, if the rider's going to be the same way, what happens is the rider comes in, jumps off the horse. As soon as the horse's pulse come down, the rider can start running and leave the crew to vet the horse. If you have 2 separate people, then the rider will come riding in. As soon as the horse's pulse is down, then the runner will take off and the rider will continue vetting. So the reason for this webinar, the reason that we're doing this is that we've been doing, again, Ride and Tie has been around. We're on our 50th year. Actually, 2020 was supposed to be our 50th year. And endurance has been around forever. And many of us do exactly the same thing. And we have been doing this together, but we have lots of holes, particularly for Ride and Tie, is that Ride and Tie is very big in California on the west. It's very big on the east from Maine to Florida. But there's gaps in the middle where we'd love to get more events going, say in Texas and Iowa and Nebraska and things like that, but also be supportive of AERC and saying, hey, if we can, so we now have an agreement between Ride and Tie and AERC that will open up more AERC rides to Ride and Tie. We're making financial compensation for the endurance rides, but it's also just so we can say, somebody can say, hey, is there an endurance ride in Colorado that would be willing to put on a Ride and Tie? At the same time, we'll help you, we'll show you how it's done, we'll make sure there's a mentor there, and you'll find out how amazingly similar and compatible these sports are. Once we can get the two things together more across the country, it's beneficial for both.
Super, thank you. One of the things that Ride and Tie prides itself on is having a single sheet of rules only on one page. And Melissa Rilby is going to not take us through all of them, but just take us through a little bit of the rules, and you'll see how similar they are to endurance. So Melissa, if you'll do that for us.
Sure. So the beauty of Ride and Tie rules lies in their simplicity. The Ride and Tie rules today look about what AERC rules look like in the 1970s. Very simple. We'll go over some of the more basic rules, and you can find more of the rules on the Ride website. So the horses in the event must be a minimum of 5 years of age. The distances typically of these Ride and Ties are anywhere from the short distance of 6 up to the longer distance of 35 miles. So 5-year-old horses seem to be able to handle that distance very well. And no pregnant or lactating mares. You must have, similar to, many of these rules are very similar to AERC. There must be a pre-ride and a post-ride veterinary exam. For the longer rides, there needs to be an exam at some point during the event, and there's no set mileage on that. The participant, one of the team members, has to present the horse for the vet exam. And how will you know if the person presenting the horse is one of the team members? Sometimes that can be tricky, but usually the key there is they're in running clothes and they're sweaty and they're excited. So that usually gives you a tip off that they're a team member. And one of those people should be presenting the horse, not a crew member. A big difference between Ride and Tie and AERC, and this is where expediency and vetting comes into play, is there are no mandatory holds. So it's important to keep in mind when you're examining these horses that these team members are on the clock. Versus an endurance ride, you can spend a little more time and at your leisure, not rush so much, because those people are not on the clock. They're on a mandatory hold. So not only are the Ride and Tie team members on the clock, one of the members is typically out front running down the trail. So for every minute that you're spending examining the horse, just keep in mind there's a partner out there running down the trail. Not that you shouldn't be thorough and take your time when needed. And certainly we want the horses to be safe, but just be efficient. And one of the important strategic rules for the team members is the team finishes when all 3 members have crossed the finish line. So not just the horse, not just one of the runners, but all 3 need to complete together. In my mind, what I see some of the biggest differences in vetting a Ride and Tie versus vetting an endurance ride is, keep in mind, the person presenting the horse may not own the horse. They may not know the horse. They may not even know horses at all. Sometimes they're very good runners, but they're not necessarily horsemen. And that brings to mind, years ago, I was vetting a Ride and Tie, and I told the runner presenting the horse, I said, I'm just not real happy with how this horse is looking. How do you think the horse is doing? Or what's going on the trail with the horse? What do you think? And the man stared at me blankly and said, well, I don't know. He goes when I kick him. So clearly this was a runner, maybe not necessarily a horseman. So just keep that in mind, that may add to your challenge in assessing the horse. Another difference, and Lonnie can correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I believe the veterinarians vetting the Ride and Ties do not need to be members of Ride and Tie. That's a difference. With AERC, the veterinarians, you do need to be a member of AERC, but I don't believe as a veterinarian for the event, you do need to be a member of the Ride and Tie Association.
Exactly, correct.
It's true.
So that's just a run through of some of the basic rules. Again, if you're familiar with the AERC rules, they're very similar in many ways. And so it's really not a big difference. The way you examine the horse is just like you would do at an endurance ride. There's really not a whole lot of differences there. So that's what I have on the rules.
Okay, good. Any the other three of you, anything rule-wise you want to say before we move into the pre-ride vet-in and the ride briefing?
I think that's, as far as the veterinarians are concerned, they don't need to know all the basics. I mean, we have rules like there's a mandatory switch at the ride or at each vet check. So what happens is somebody will ride and they have to run out, but that's not the veterinarian's problem. I mean, it's an honor system. It's the veterinarians they don't have to manage the ride. They don't have to manage the riding tires. They just have to guffaw and pick them up when they fall down. And it's mainly like Melissa says, you're just vetting it exactly like an AERC ride. And so there are more rules. The more you learn about ride and tie, the more amazing it is, the more interesting it is. But you don't have to worry about that. That's not your job to govern that. You're just keeping track of the horses.
Super, thank you. Okay, well, Nick is now going to share with us the vet-in and the pre-ride briefing. And so, Nick, take it away.
Great. Well, as Melissa and Lonnie have already mentioned, with the pre-ride vet-in, it's absolutely no different than what you guys are usually used to doing for the regular endurance rides. And about the only thing you're going to notice when these horses come up is usually ride managers will designate either with an R and a number, or we've done letters so that you can easily tell that, okay, this is a ride and tie horse and not an LD or a 50. About the only maybe a small difference with the vet-in is remember, as they mentioned, some of these ride and tie events are only going to be 6 miles. So when the mother and the small child come up on the kind of chubby looking horse, you're not worried about this horse going out for 25, 30 miles. It's just got to do 6 miles. They're not going to be, as some people worried, I mean, they're not going at breakneck speed. Any horse out there can do this. So don't get bent out of shape if it's a little chunky. Biggest difference I see is if you're the head vet, is with your ride talk. You're going to, the riding tires are going to be with the group. First thing I usually like to do when I'm giving the talk is let people know that there is a ride and tie at the event. Just give a very brief description of what a ride and tie is, for in case there's people there that are not familiar with it. I'll usually try and point out one person that's there with the ride and tie and say, if anybody in the group has more questions, go see this person later. Then I'll start talking about, usually the ride and ties will start at a different time than the other events. Usually the ride managers work this out, do they want to go earlier because they're going on a different loop? Do they want to go like 15 minutes later? I like to let the whole group know, because occasionally I've had it happen where ride and tie has gone off a little early, and some people in the other events thought they missed the start. Mm-hmm. So if you alert them ahead of time that, hey, these people are going to be out there. And then again, let them know, hey, there's going to be runners on the course, just like you would talk about if you're having an event on public ground. Be courteous, be cautious, let people know that you're coming up on them. I also like, in case there's brand new ride and tie people there, alert the runners, hey, don't go hiding off in the trees when you hear these horses coming up behind you. You don't want to spook the horse, you know, just keep doing what you're doing, let them know you're there. Then I'll talk about if there's cutoff times. Typically the ride and tie, I don't remember if it was actually mentioned for the rules part that they have no time limit on these events. But as you guys know, if you work rides, you know, like Tevis, Old Dominion, Vermont 100, as a veterinarian, to get to the different away checks, you have to be able to leave at a certain time. So like the Old Dominion, we have people doing the 100, they know that they still have to, you know, make it to this hold by a specific time. Quick thought too for you guys on something like this, you may want to let them know, one of the rides we do in the East with an away check, we cannot get to the finish line, those of us at the away check, by the time those early ride and tires are going to finish. So often we will have the treatment vet who remains at base camp do the completions. So let the ride and tires know, hey, when, you know, in those groups, when you get to the finish, look for such and such a person. They'll do your completion. Now, I will explain to the group the reason that we generally try and allow the ride and tires to quote unquote jump in line when they come in for the vetting has been explained already. It's because you've got the rider that came in, tried to do the horse, the runner may have already come in and they've already taken off. So you really don't want that person to have to stand around for a long time while the person's off running. Often we will allow the ride and tires to keep their tack on for that reason, when we might request tack off from the rest of the group. However, remember, as a veterinarian, you can still request they take the tack off, especially, you know, if you see a lameness and you're questioning it. I always too like to have them take, at least even if they keep the saddle stuff on, to take the leg protection off, because chance of getting something up in between the protection and the leg and causing a rub. This is also generally a good time to talk to the ride and tires about how you're going to handle rechecks, because remember, they don't have a set hold. So if you see a mild lameness or you're concerned about some gut sounds or something and you'd like to see this horse back, you want to establish ahead of time, well, how much time are you going to allow them to work on that horse? Are you going to allow them 30 minutes, or are you going to allow them the hold time that the rest of the group knows or has? And of course, yeah, the ride and tie team wants to know because the runner's out there. I remember a classic one with Lonnie when she was riding Storm and Norman, who wouldn't come down to pulse, and poor Kathy ran the whole loop all by herself because Storm and Norman kept screaming the whole time. So good thing to let them know this ahead of time. Also, again, let the people in the whole group know if they see a horse tied to the tree, just to leave it there. Talk about pulse criteria, whether you're going to go with the AERC pulses or allow the higher pulse that Ride and Tie allows up to 70. And then also talk about whether or not you're going to have a BC. And that's going to be discussed in a little bit here of how that's done. But again, just like you would with a regular ride talk, let them know about that so that they can prepare. I think that's all I've got.
Okay, good. Other three, any other thing to add or any other observations?
I think he's got it. That's good.
Yeah. I would like just to say, as a non-vet, as a competitor, I so much, and I think you will find 99% of Riding Tire is going to be this way too. I so much respect and want to follow whatever the head vet says. And so if you want, for example, I've been to a few races where they've said it's a really hot day or whatever, we want you to take the tack off at the mid-race check. You're not going to get a lot of pushback. If you're the head vet, you're the head vet for ARC, for the endurance ride, the ARC ride, you're the head vet for the Riding Tie. And I don't think you're going to get pushback. And please, you do what you think is best for the horses. And I think you're going to find a lot of appreciation from those of us that are competing, even if you're asking us to do more than we normally do.
I just have a comment about rider cards. Maybe that varies from Riding Tie to Riding Tie. I would say typically out west, we do not use rider cards on Riding Tie. I can't comment what happens in the east typically, but out west, I don't find that we usually have rider cards for the Riding Tie horses.
We're going to get to that in a little bit, but that's interesting because I didn't realize that. We're going to move along now to we've done the vet in, but of course we have the mid-race check and the and the vet cards and the BC. And so let's see, Greg is going to do that for us. So Greg, talk to us a little bit first about vet checks.
Again, I think other folks have spoken to it, but the most important thing to know is when you're doing the actual veterinary exam, it's no different than what you're used to doing with your endurance horses. You go through the same metabolic parameter checks, your lameness trot out and grading is exactly the same. The pulse criteria, if it's been set different than what your endurance horses have, you'll need to keep track of that. Often the criteria are the same. The vet check works just the same also. The teams have to be timed in. The horse has to meet pulse criteria within that 30-minute window. And again, there's been comments about the tack. Typically at mid-race vet checks, the tack is left on, but if there are issues, there's no reason why you can't have the tack, ask for the tack to be temporarily removed. Again, it's already been mentioned, the fact that Riding Tie teams do not have mandatory holds. And again, for the horse, up to that vet check, that horse has been going through a series of short, fairly rapid runs and then short rests. So you can imagine then the heart rate for these horses is going up and down quite differently than the more constant rate that you might see with the endurance horses. The vet check is what we call a mandatory tie. That is, whoever rides the horse in has to run out. So the ideal vet check is if the rider gets in with the horse, takes a few minutes to get some water and some nutrition and takes off. And if you got your strategy worked out just perfectly, as the second runner arrives at the vet check, your horse hits criteria. And boom, you walk over to the vet check and you're good to go. And you can have your crew helping with you get the horse cooled down, but the horse cannot be presented until that runner is there, and that team member has to present the horse. If you'll go on to the vet card, which I think is the next panel, we do try to use vet cards. We may not have them with the horses. We may hold on to them at the vet check area if you're in camp and they're doing loops that come back to you. But we all have our routines that we go through. Each of us have developed where we need to check all those boxes, grade all those boxes. And this is the card that's on the Ride and Tie website that can be provided for Ride and Tie competitions if you don't already have cards provided by Ride Management. So again, I'd like to emphasize that the actual examination of the horse is absolutely no different than what you've been used to doing. And then finally, a word about best condition. Nick mentioned that you need to announce at your pre-ride briefing whether you're going to do best condition or not. It's usually reserved for those events of longer distances of 20 or more miles, and usually it's like at championship events where you have larger numbers of teams. So you may designate that the top 10 teams qualify for best condition, or if it's a smaller class, it's the top 5, or maybe it's the top 25%. Or if you want to do best condition anyway, no matter how many are there, everybody might qualify to stand for best condition. It's just make sure that you work that out with your event managers beforehand and announce it at the pre-ride check-in. This Ride and Tie best condition worksheet that you see there was developed by Jim Steer, probably way back, when Levi was running the Ride and Tie Championship. So probably way back in the 70s and 80s, he developed this form, and we've sort of fine-tuned it over the years. The only difference in best condition, again, basically between Ride and Tie and endurance, is that weight is not part of the factor. So the two factors are the exam, which accounts for 80% of the total points here, and time, which accounts for 20% of the time. And there's a kind of an easy to follow mathematical formula that you go through to calculate time points for the teams. So again, best condition is up to the head vet and management to decide if they're going to award it and who qualifies. So that's
good. Thank you. Other three, anything you want to chime in on about the vet checks and the vet cards of the BC?
I think just a couple of things. Just a couple of things based on what everybody else has said. So in the holds, and Courtney has talked about this in some of the earlier webinars, but if you're doing this right, there's no downtime for the runners in the holds. So the first runner, which is usually the fastest person, will come in, jump off the horse. If they've done this right, they have a second water pack, a second Camelback or something. They don't fill water bottles. They're already ready to go. They will hand the horse to the crew, take a goo or whatever nutrition they need, and they're out on the trail again within probably 30 seconds. So, and they're sort of focused on getting out there. And then the second person coming in, they've almost got it harder because they haven't been riding. So they'll come running in, and the crew will say he's ready. So then they haven't even had a drink yet. So the runner will come in, take the horse, go straight to the vet. So there are a lot of times they're not super communicative because you know how runners are. They're kind of in a zone anyway. So you don't get a whole lot of chit chat from the Ride and Tires because they're totally focused on getting the horse down, refilling the water pack, getting on and going. So all the chit chat and all the sitting around comes afterward. And then going by what Nick said is that you can do this because it's a different it's a different concept. So you can do this with any breed. And we've had Shetlands out there, and we've had thoroughbreds out there, and we've had draft horses out there. And what matters a lot is temperament, because since you're going to be getting on and off this thing, and since you may have here on the East Coast, we do it a lot with families. So you'll have a kid and the dad doing it, or you'll have two kids doing it and the parents are doing it side by side with a different horse. So as Nick said, somebody comes up with something that has a little jewelry, or that looks a little Cushing's, or whatever it is, if it takes care of its people and is sound and comfortable and happy, that's really what you want to look at. You don't want to be critical if it doesn't look like a top 10 Arabian. And because for us out there on the trail, the kinder the horse is, the less it makes it a full contact sport, because you want to be resting when you're on the horse. You don't want to be fighting it and arguing with it. But we do that a lot. As he mentioned, Norman was a full contact sport every step. But the best ride and tie horses really are retired endurance horses, because they already know how to camp, they know how to eat, they know how to drink, they know how to go down the trail, and they're totally cool about being tied to a tree. So, there's nothing better than an 18-year-old Arabian who has done endurance for 10 years and now is smart enough to do ride and tie. Those are the best horses, because they know how to vet, they know how to do everything, and they're just surreal to have a horse that's that well trained. But you can do it with anything. I mean, you can do it with a percheron. It's just harder to cool them off. The other thing we do a lot of, and ride and tires really like, are multi-day events. Is we love it because if you're going to drive 6 hours to get somewhere, we love to do 2 or 3 ride and tires in a row. Or the other thing you can do is we love AERC rides that have 2 or 3 days, because then you can ride and tie one day, do an AERC ride the next day, ride and tie the next day, something like that. So we particularly love, so some of these horses will go 2 or 3 days and they finally get good on the third day. They're finally manageable on the third day. But as ride and tires, we're just so grateful to have an opportunity to have a venue, because when we join up with an endurance ride, we're using their veterinarians, we're using their trail, we're using their camp, we're using their markings, we're using their awards. And so we're so grateful to be able to come, that we don't do a lot of whining, because we want to be able to come again next year. But those are just a couple of things that I thought about when people are talking.
And just keep on rolling, Alani, with a little bit of post ride, whether vet check or whatever you might need to add on that. So as we said earlier, the finish line is the finish time is when all 3 members, the 2 runners and the horse, cross the finish line. And the rule, you don't have to cross together. Well, you do have to everybody has to follow the same trail. Now, and there are some other rules that, like, they have to switch 6 times and things like that over the entire course. That's not your problem as a veterinarian, but they do, so they don't have to all cross the finish line at the same time. But we usually try to do it so we're fairly close to each other, because that maximizes the efficiency of using the horse. But as Greg said, is that the horses, their pulse goes up and down a lot. So when the horse crosses the finish line, they haven't been running for 20 miles. They haven't been running even since the last vet check. They might have stood tied half a mile down the road, and then they've just come just a half a mile. So it's very, very common that the 2 runners and the horse will cross the finish line together, and they'll go straight to the water bucket, and they'll go straight to the vet. I mean, there's just not a whole lot of cooling involved, because the horses are already down to pulse. They're down to parameters. So they do have, and again, it's up to the head vet. I mean, it's because, now I don't know, because I know with AERC is AERC rules are the minimum, and ride managers can increase the rules or add the rules they needed. And so I would imagine that whatever AERC says, AERC goes. But the ride and tie rules say that the horse has an hour from the finish time, from the time that all 3 members cross the finish line, to pass the completion exam. And of course, just as with AERC, is everybody's going to want to get their completion immediately, before anything happens, before somebody hangs a leg over a lead rope, or before somebody stiffens up. So you're going to see that every single person, they're not going to go back to the trail or do anything. They're going to come straight to you, get their completion. But the idea would be is that you have an hour in case you have an issue, in case the gut sounds are quiet, or in case you have an electrolyte abnormality, or in case something's going on. You do have up to an hour from the finish time, from crossing the finish line, to pass the completion exam. And again, we do, personally for us, we're just so grateful. The awards are, again, as a veterinarian, not your issue. I mean, we totally have awards, but nobody really cares, because we're so glad to be alive, to have survived, to have made it across the finish line, to still have a horse
that isn't heading towards the Atlantic Ocean, and we're wondering where it is. So everything is again the same as with endurance, is cross the finish line, get your completion, pat each other on the back, and then drink gallons and gallons and gallons of fluids to replenish what you have lost during the day.
Okay, good. Thank you. I'd like to mention a couple of things at the very end of the ride, particularly for the scribes, actually throughout the ride, that is different, a little different AERC, and that is that you actually as a scribe are keeping track of the horse primarily, but you also need to be keeping track at least a little bit of whoever is on the ground. And so, and this is most critical at the end, because the race is won by when all three team members come across, as we've already mentioned. And so if I am, if my ride tie horse number is RT3 and I'm on the ground, I'm not on the horse, but when I come across that finish line, I'm going to say RT3 runner is in. And if you can just make a little note there, and RT3 horse may or may not be in. And it's also kind of helpful, if you don't mind, just like you're doing as the horses go back out, RT3 is headed back out. So that when my horse comes in, they may ask you, how long has my runner been back out? Because as you know, if I ride in, I'm going to run out. And so my runner may come in behind me and say, well, how long has he been back? Has he been out there running? And you can say, well, he came in 15 minutes ago, whatever. So that's a little different. You gonna say something?
I was gonna say that's really a timer, not a scribe.
Okay, well, time. That's true. That is more timer than scribe. I'm getting my terms confused. The other thing I'd like to mention that is much more on the vet end is it to me, it's hard for me to get it in my head because I do endurance as well. The rule for the finish for ride tie is just like the rules for a finish for endurance, not for limited distance, because the horse and the whole team comes across and that's when their time ends. It's not when the horse pulse is down, but it's when the time ends. And so that's more like endurance than like limited distance, but our mileage is more like limited distance. So we may do a 25 or a 30-mile ride tie, but you're gonna score it like an endurance, if that makes sense. And y'all confirm for me that I'm saying that correctly.
Yep, exactly.
Right? Okay. Okay, good. All right. Well, I'm gonna stop our shared screen now. I know we've got one question. Let's see. Pam Carner is asking, in Equithon, does the horse has to pass the entire exam before the runner can leave, or just pulse criteria? And also in Equithon, does the horse always go first? So who would like to answer that?
I'd like to say hi to Pam.
Yeah. I was emailing her earlier today.
Yeah, just good to hear her name. But all the horse has to do is to get that runner out is to meet pulse, and then the runner can take off, and then in the next few minutes or 5 minutes or whenever you've got a little bit of time, then you could go ahead and complete the examination of the horse. There are those rare times when the horse doesn't pass, doesn't complete, it's lame or whatever. And then unfortunately, the runner gets to do that loop just for a nice day of exercise. But and also, yes, in the Equithon, the horse always goes first.
Okay, good. Another question has come in. Let's see. Case Terry, just want to say hi to Dr. Greg and Dr. Melissa. Always a pleasure working with you, Greg.
Oh, hope things are good in Montana. Good man.
Okay. Anything else you vets want to make sure that a vet or a scribe might need to know or want to know?
One thing I would bring up, during one of the mid-race checks, because I've run into what Melissa talked about earlier, that you have the runner come up with the horse and doesn't really know horses. So if you as a veterinarian do have a major concern with lameness or something like that, I find it helpful to call over the crew member and let them know, what your concern is.
Yeah, good point.
Anything else? Okay, well, let me say to all of anybody who is watching this, you can easily find Greg or Lonnie or me on the Ride and Tie website, and that's rideandtie.org, and all of our contact information is there. You know how to find Nick at AARC, and Melissa's probably not that hard to track down either. Please, if you have any questions, find us, ask us. And we certainly want to be as helpful as we can be. As I believe it was Greg said earlier, we are so thankful to have this new affiliation with AARC. I think it's going to be wonderful for both the sports, and I think it's going to help both of our sports grow and thrive. And so thank you for helping us do that.
Yeah, as
Anything else?
AARC, we are glad to be partnering with you guys.
Good
Yeah,
deal.
this is exciting times. We're looking forward to this partnership.
I would rather do a Ride and Tie at an AARC ride. It's just more people, it's more fun, more excitement, and it's also a lot of fun out there on the course when endurance come by, because a lot of them they love to tease us and say, why would you tie a perfectly good horse to a tree and run away from it? You've got to be insane to do that kind of thing. So we have fun teasing and all that. So I do think it's gonna be good for both sports. All right. Well, I thank you for your participation. Thanks to our vets so much for your expertise and all you're doing for us. And again, thanks to AARC and to the Ride and Die Association for making all this happen.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good evening.
Good night.